Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Giant Pod with me, your host, Andy Wrintmore. My guest this week is my good friend and Frome Town Council colleague, Nick Dove. But we're not here to talk about politics or the Town Council today. We're here to talk about his 30 years in law enforcement, starting in the late 80s in the Metropolitan Police. We talk about moving to the drug squad. We talk about the flying squad, which is known as the Sweeney, named after the iconic UK, I think it was a 70s TV show. Anti-corruption squads. We talk about bugging houses and things that can go wrong. We talk about armed robberies. We talk about drug bust raids that can go wrong. We talk about fighting men with machetes and how adrenaline can easily take over and cloud judgment in a professional capacity. Did I mention hostage negotiation? No, I didn't, but that's in there as well. There's so much to talk about in this podcast that I almost don't want to say any more, really, because I don't want to spoil anything. But it's just jam-packed, full of success, full of fun, full of ambition and drive. And being proactive, and I think integrity as well. That's a big thing. The big theme throughout Nick's policing career is maintaining integrity. I think that's really important to mention. Trigger warning, content warning. We do talk about suicide and domestic abuse. So if you are sensitive to that and would rather pass on this, then there we have the warnings for you. Beyond that, really good pod. Really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to stop waffling on now and just let you guys get on with it. Really, really good one. Here it is. Nick Dove. Enjoy. This sounds like a pretty... I guess, you know, with the jobs that police do, you kind of get a bit numb to some things, don't you? And a gallows humour comes out.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
And I guess it's not for the faint of heart, is it? You've got to have pretty thick skin.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing job, and some extraordinary people, and some of the experiences that people have, and I was lucky enough to be part of them. They're extraordinary and sometimes life-affirming, sometimes hugely distressing and moving, but in terms of how you react to that, it's different, and you know the culture is extremely strong. You know, you've got to be very strong and fiercely independent if you don't kind of go with the herd mentality. You know, you arrive at a police station, and you are everyone used to start in exactly the same way. You all started as a uniformed constable. You know, helmet, wooden truncheon in my day, kind of really basic, and you get posted to what they call a relief, a team, and you do earlies, lates and nights with that team, and that's your whole kind of life. You work with them, and, you know, if you call for help, they'll come and help you, all those kind of things, and you want to fit in, you know, it's that desperate not to be the most junior person, to be accepted, and it's really strong, and of course, if you join a team that got bad habits and misbehave, and that becomes really challenging and really difficult, and I was lucky. I came in with a degree of maturity and an ambition to become a detective, so I wasn't on that
What
track.
year is this?
1982.
82. So
Yeah.
you see, still got the wooden truncheons at that point.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What does the gear? So you show up. You got your first day of work as a constable in 1982 in the Met, and they hand you your uniform. What does that look like?
Okay, you have the helmet, the old-fashioned helmet.
Yeah, the big tall one.
Yeah, leather inside, hard top, metal top, leather strap that's supposed to go underneath your chin, hold it in place, because it never does. A heavy blue serge uniform with buttons, a whistle, a wooden truncheon that slides into the side pocket of your right-hand side of your trousers, and you get 3 accident report books, 3 incident report books, and a police notebook, which you're supposed to write everything significant in. It all goes in a leather case, like a sort of like a big wallet, which goes into your left-hand trouser pocket. Belt, heavy trousers, heavy, you know, that surge. It gets wet and it's a nightmare. You know, it just drags, and heavy black boots. That was it. Face the world.
Crazy now. If you look at a police officer now, they've got body cams, stab-proof vests. They've got it's not called a truncheon anymore. It's called some sort of like baton, a what?
Asp.
An asp.
Asp or a baton, yeah.
And this is the one that you sort of flick out and it comes out and sort of, you got taser gun. It's probably not the pepper spray.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. Probably still got a notepad. Now, tell me, is there any truth in this that I've heard that your notebook, your notepad and pen will save your life more times than your truncheon? because when you're starting to write someone's name down, it's powerful.
I think, I was thinking about this podcast when I was today earlier on when I was out, and I was thinking about the changes. And when I started out, most people respected and believed the police.
Right.
And unfortunately, my generation and probably the generation before and subsequently have spoilt that. But the change in technology, now that everyone has got basically a camera in their pocket, everyone is accountable. There's a great, and the speed at which news travels and word travels makes it enormous. There was I could stop somebody with my pathetic kind of wooden truncheon, never even get it out, and they would see and mostly, right, if I stopped them, they would stop and they would listen and they would do what they were told. There wouldn't be this pushback. And, some of that is wrong that they should push back, but there are, lots of horrible stories. And I've, seen them, I've investigated some of them, where people have behaved in a way in the past, police have behaved in a way that will tarnish their reputation and their, how they're perceived by that family and their friends forever. You can't get that back. Right. If you've acted unlawfully, if you've used your authority to arrest somebody unlawfully, to fit them up in a sort of parlance, and how would you ever trust those people again? And so that side. So it's changed. So the notebook was only powerful in terms of that's where you wrote your evidence down. But I'd say no. I mean, the most powerful thing is your ability to speak to people. How do you communicate?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's just I heard that as soon as that notebook comes out, people know they're on the rack then a little bit, and they're under scrutiny, and it's you better behave. Maybe that's an old school thing.
I think
it's
a bit.
Really old school.
I think a bit now. Everyone would be hitting whatever this voice memo or something now. So very different.
Yeah. Well, have you heard some of the latest news? I know the States and the English police there's a very big divide between the two police forces and how they operate. But have you seen it recently when police officers have been stopping people in the States? They've been playing music by the Beatles or whoever, because when this person is filming them on Facebook Live or Instagram Live, the algorithms in these social media platforms pick up that copyrighted music is being playing, and they shut down the audio.
Wow.
For the video. So police are cottoning on in the States where they're stopping people and talking to people, and they're filming them. Everyone wants to do that these days, don't they? As soon as you're stopped by the police officer, no, I'm going to film you, you're going to film me. And, I guess that there's this mutually assured destruction if anyone puts a foot out of step. I guess that's the vibe there. But what some reports are that police are starting to play music so that the audio of these things get shut down, which seems kind of tyrannical in a way.
It's to me, just behave as you should behave. It's a huge responsibility. It's a huge honour to carry. In the UK, the warrant card, the sort of Queen's warrant as such, and you should behave accordingly. And to start finding ways to basically disguise and hide what you're doing. Why are you doing that? You're either behaving, you're either acting how you should, or you're not.
Yeah, what you're hiding.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of body-worn cameras. Why? If they weren't around, they were around, but not in the squads I worked. But if I was a uniform officer now, I'd be very keen to wear them because it's my defence, my security, and it would make sure I remember and focus, but it also gives me that kind of understanding that if I'm dealing with someone and they make allegations about how I've treated them, I said, well, no, let's watch this, let's play it back and see.
Yeah. I guess, I like that idea that it's on, so that you're bringing your A game as well. Interesting. So you've been issued your what seems like a very sort of antique. Sorry, Nick. Police uniform and equipment, and you head out onto the streets. What's your first sort of week like as a police officer? Is it quite shocking? Is it?
It was, I mean, basically, that you start off, you're a probationer, and so you basically got to do a number of things, and they would send you out with a more experienced police officer. And the one I went out with said, right, you're going to learn every street in this on your manor, in your way you're policing. So I'll say to you any time, like 3 a.m, what street you in? And you've got to tell me. The idea being when you end up having a kind of run to go and support someone, help someone, you'll know exactly where you are and you can respond. And our radios in those days had a range of about 300 metres. It was just ridiculous, and that was just back to the base. They weren't sort of person to person. And genuinely, you would quite often get your whistle out and blow this bloody whistle. And I know time goes quickly, but it's not that long ago. So the change is hugely. So you'd learn the street, they learn the streets, and then you'd learn who the local villains were. And you go looking for them because as a probationer, you had to have your figures for arrests, stops, and processing. So vehicle crimes, so stopping motorists.
So you were working to like a quota in a way.
Yeah,
then?
definitely. And that's one of the things that is kind of often unseen and unappreciated. And it's bad in some ways because, of course, you're forced. If you're ambitious, as I was. I wanted to be a detective. To be a detective, you had to be what was called a good thief taker.
Right.
So you had to have your numbers. They said, how many people you arrested this week? And of course, if you're struggling and you haven't been, fortunate, been in the right place at the right time and so on, unscrupulous colleagues would go looking for people who they knew were maybe bad and arrest them for something that maybe they hadn't done.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to ask you about that because you would, if you were a very ambitious young police officer and you knew, say, you wanted to be a detective, but you knew you had to make X amount of inquiries, arrests, stops, whatever. It would be easy with no body cams, with radios that only go 300 meters, whatever, to do that. And do you think there's any truth in that? The role of police officer can appeal to to the very wrong sort of people because there is power, isn't there? And it is. I believe that I don't want to say all police officers are psychopaths or anything like that, but I'm sure that kind of job does appeal to very low empathy people.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways of looking at it. I mean, if you look at my ambition was to become a detective on the flying squad. To get there, bear in mind there are 120 detectives on the flying squad in London and 40,000 cops. So to get there, it was a fairly competitive process. Not everyone wanted to go down that route, of course. And so to get there, I had to get out of uniform. So I had to, first of all, prove to the CID in my local station that I was a good thief taker. I knew what I was doing. I had to be selected to join a plainclothes unit. And then I'd start investigating minor crimes. And if I was good at that, I'd then get onto the crime squad where you go out in, sort of plainclothes, jeans and T-shirt and go and find crime being committed. You couldn't respond to calls for help. You had to go and find crime and arrest people. And at the end of each month, the DS would call us all into the office and say, right, you've had 6 arrests, and you walk through it. And there'd then be selection boards for detective coming up. And so the process was tough, and you would work long. I'd quite often stay on and do a double shift for no overtime because I hadn't arrested anybody in the first 8 hours. And I'd come in early and I'd go and speak to the collator, who was the intelligence cell on the station, and say, what's going on? What do you know? What crimes have happened overnight? Where do they happen? Because I was just so keen to get there. So there was that side, and I'd kind of, it was, I think, probably about 10 or 15% of us got through to the detective. Of course, the rest just stayed trying to get there. And of course, people get desperate and they go out and they'd arrest people. Some kind of extreme sort of elements that I dealt with later on when I was a detective, where sort of more sort of corruption end, when cops became bad. But at the lower level, that you get the people who had that ambition, so they would fit people up, or they would add, it's called gilding the lily, all these kind of expressions, noble cause corruption, that kind of stuff, all this kind of...
So what do these things mean? They just mean sort of framing someone or putting someone in a position to slip up and then be ready to arrest them?
I mean, if you know, for example, if you know that Fred Bloggs is a prolific car thief, or in the early 80s, one of the main sort of low-level crimes was breaking into people's cars, ripping out the stereos. If you know that person's doing it, and you know because other criminals have told you, if you know because he's been seen in the vicinity but nobody caught him, all those kind of things. And you're out at night and he's out there and he's got a hammer in his pocket and you think, right, it would be a lot easier for me to arrest him and say I'd seen him try and smash that window, rather than just say you shouldn't be out here with a hammer in the early hours of the morning.
Right.
So you've then got a prisoner.
So you can get into a strange situation there, because morally, you've sort of bent the rules a little bit and told a white lie, and you could go to bed presumably and sleep soundly, knowing that actually what you did was, it was kind of wrong, but he had a hammer in his pocket at 3 a.m, so he couldn't have been up to anything too helpful. So how do people, because it isn't black and white, is it?
No.
It's not black and white.
No, it's not. And I know circumstances where people have been in that situation where they've been stopped by the police in suspicious circumstances. The police said, right, I'm arresting you. I'm going to say that I saw you try those door handles on those cars. And six months later at the magistrate's court, that individual gets up and pleads guilty. Says, I did it. Because actually you get a lesser sentence, and he knows he's, for the 100 he's done, he's only been caught for 5 or something like that. So it's a bit of a kind of grey area. But of course, the black and white of it is they were wrong. They lied.
Yeah.
So
they were dishonest.
Yeah.
So when you talk about local villains and things like that on your patch and in your area, I know there's an awful lot of policing career to get through. So I try not to spend too much time on the regular street beat stuff. Is there ever a point where you've dealt with these people so much, it is a bit like a game, I guess, in some regards, isn't it? Like, I know you, I'm going to catch you out.
Yeah.
And did you ever get to a point where some people where you were like, I kind of weirdly respect you because you try your best, but you're a villain at the end of the day? Yeah,
definitely. I think, what little success I maybe had in policing was because I kind of recognise, I like people, and I, again, being older than a lot of my sort of peers, you kind of develop an empathy, and you see most people you deal with, most people you deal with as a police officer aren't really criminals. They're people who've got issues, and they end up getting into trouble. And, the first point of call is nearly always the cops. So you have the kind of whole group, you've got, sort of drug problems, alcohol problems, mental health issues who, end up getting into scuffles, into trouble and so on. But I kind of quite often, and to become successful as a detective, you need to be able to get criminals to talk to you, because you want admissions and convictions, or B, most importantly, in many ways, you want information from them.
Yeah.
I ran informants for 20 years, and they were all people who I'd arrested initially, and who I'd developed a relationship with, to the point where they trusted me enough to start giving me information. Sometimes just because they wanted revenge on somebody, usually because they wanted money. Sometimes they wanted to reduce sentence, but it was about building a relationship with them. And I had huge respect. I had one informant who I ran for 10 years, and his courage, his bravery was just extraordinary. He was passing me information about really serious criminals, and had they found out, they'd have killed him. And I remember him, I used to socialise with him officially. I'd go and spend time with him. And he said, I can't tell anyone else in the world what I do. I can't tell my family because they'd be ashamed. I can't tell certainly my criminal associates, they'd kill me. He says, the only person I can talk to. So I spent a lot of time with him and other people. And I kind of understand, those choices sometimes people make. There are obviously some really horrible people involved in crime that do despicable crimes, particularly, violence towards their partners, those kind of things that have been very influential in how I've acted, how I've worked in my policing career. But the general kind of criminal involved in sort of crimes that are acquisitive of nature, those kind of things, I kind of find quite easier to sit and listen to and talk to them, bond with them almost, and develop a relationship with them, albeit you've always got to have borders.
Right. So when you say running an informant, what you mean is having an ongoing professional relationship with them, where they understand that they understand they're giving you information, and it's a two-way street, right? Yeah,
they are good informants. Will be good criminals. They'll be successful criminals who have a network of people that they are trusted by, so they know what's happening in their community or in their sort of sphere. And you usually, as a detective, come into contact with them because usually they've been arrested. Sometimes they've been the victim of something, or you get to meet them or whatever. And as I said, their motivation is usually financial. They want a reward for doing it. They want to get revenge on someone. or they want to get a reduction in whatever sentence they've got coming towards them. It's an area where lots of my friends in the past have got into a lot of trouble. It's a really, really fraught area. You've got to be really, really careful how you manage it. But, you've got to manage it professionally. You've always got to keep a bit of a distance. You've always got to document all the kind of processes. You can't make promises you can't encourage them to commit crimes that wouldn't otherwise be committed. There's a kind of, you can't get them to go out and say to somebody they know is involved in drugs, I want to buy a kilo of coke, can you go and get it for me? Then come and tell me as a cop and I go and arrest them for the kilo of coke. They've got to act. The crime has already got to be what's called laid on or happening.
Right.
So, but it's an area that's hugely productive if you run it well, but can get you into huge trouble because the informant can end up running you as a cop.
Oh, right. So they switch the game up on you and they say to their guys, hey, now this guy thinks I'm ratting on you and I'm not, but he's onto you, Mickey Four Fingers.
Yeah.
He's sniffing around your operation, and they go, well, thanks very much, and they go underground for a while, and then
that's one way. And another way is when a good informant knows that you as a detective, a lot of your success will be related to the information they give you. And later on in my career, I worked on the anti-corruption squad, and what would happen is you're on, say, the flying squad. To be successful, you need to know when bank robberies are going to take place. So an informant will say, this is going to take place, and they will then start saying, but you'll need to give me some of the proceeds. You need to let me keep some of the proceeds, or I'll give you some of the proceeds. And because you're desperate to keep a good informant, they end up running you and your squad almost.
That is interesting because it's all, it's in their best interest sometimes, like you said, to be an informant, because you might be able to give them, if they get caught down the line, they might be able to say, hey, look, I'm an asset to you, a reduced sentence or whatever sort of bargaining chip that they can throw at you. But also, it's almost not in their best interest to see their entire criminal network locked up sometimes, is it? Because that would be shooting themselves in the foot, especially if they don't have any legit means of income. Although maybe in some cases it works in their favour to see a few certain characters go away, because then they can fill that vacuum.
Yeah, particularly in the drugs field. The drugs was a classic one. You'd arrest somebody. I was on the drug squad in the mid-90s, Central London drug squad, and you'd arrest someone with, say, a couple of ounces of coke. And I'd say, okay, you're in deep trouble now, but that trouble could be a bit less if you tell me who supplied you with that. So you'd work up the chain.
Right.
And a good informant would find ways to inform on his or her rivals in the area, so they'd be taken out by the police and he'd suddenly get all their client list.
Right. And then where are you left? Because he knows then that you know his or her operation, and that you're going to come for them. If they suddenly have a monopoly on the coke trade of that area, because you've taken out their closest rival, surely they know their days are numbered anyway, don't you?
No, because you spread wider. With drugs, it's always about going up the chain.
Right.
So
okay.
you then go for the importers. You go over to the Caribbean and pick out the team from there. You take out a shipload coming in from Colombia, and they'd be left with the sort of really lucrative end, which is the street end, where they're running the street dealers.
Right. That's fascinating. So you've done your street work. And what's next after that? You've finally become a detective, I assume.
Yeah, go to detective training school. Then I get posted to an inner city station. First posting as a detective constable, a place called Harrow Road in Kilburn. Funny place. This was 1987, 88. And it was an office, very old-fashioned CID office. Frankly, most of the office were drunks. Absolutely. But at lunchtime, they were saying, right, we're going out on the manor. Let's go and hit these pubs. You wouldn't pay for a drink. It was awful. And I think for your new boy, first time DCI comes out and says, come with me, we go out, and sort of 8 hours later I can't stand up, I'm full of it. So in future I would make sure about 11:30, when I knew he'd come looking for something, I'd just go and hide somewhere else in the station and do something else, so he'd pick on someone else and I could then focus on the work. But it was brilliant. I loved it there. It was I made some fantastic friends who are still friends of mine today, all these years later. Great place to work. I learnt a lot. You have that kind of rather daunting thing when you're the only detective on night duty and the uniformer officers are out misbehaving, beating up people, bringing them in. You have to go downstairs and they say, right, what are we going to do here? You've got to sort of find a way to deal with the mess they've created. It was a tough area. I mean, I would go and arrest somebody with my detective colleagues for something, and they say, "Oh, please don't take us to Harrow Road. We always get beaten up when we go in there." So that's immediately, okay, we'll take you to Notting Hill, it'll be safer. But, what are you going to tell us? What's going on? Is that kind of way you understand the situation? Nobody wants to get beaten up for nothing, and it's unnecessary and brutal.
So are you saying that in this area of policing in 1988, there was a lot of police brutality? Would you say that there's
in that area it was pretty tough. There was a lot of street crime, street robberies. We're talking about before the Broadwater Farm riots, but after the Brixton riots, a lot of kind of tensions amongst races, a lot of obvious racism, but not yet been exposed and acted on. Where I was working, I was running the little robbery squad team there, and we'd have probably 8 or 9 robberies a day in our small part of London. And all the all the suspects were black. Most of the victims were either white or Asian. It was quite a funny area. It's a sort of Maida Vale is a sort of affluent part, and then it moves into Kilburn and Kensal Rise and Willesden. Rough areas, challenging estates. I mean, I really enjoyed it because, when you go somewhere as a police officer detective, you want to be somewhere that's busy, where there's a variety of, there's lots of, quality victims. There's good things going on. And I really enjoyed it, and it had funny moments. I remember the uniformed superintendent taking me up onto the roof of this Victorian police station. I'd been there about 3 or 4 months, and he said, "Son, come up here." And he says, "Look all around." He's looking around. He says, "This is our manor. We own it." It's like some living in some kind of fantasy world, really. But
this is a Guy Ritchie film.
I mean, I have ambitions to do some work in that area if I can remember all my stories. I've done a draft screenplay and episode. So, but anyway, it was very, very moving in some ways and very interesting. And one of the most formative, I think is a word, experiences of my life happened there with crime. I was working on a sort of late shift, and the station officer called out and said, "I want a detective come down and speak to somebody at the front counter." I went down. There's a young black woman there, about 24, with a tiny baby. Really quite upset, and I took her into the side room and said, "What's up?" And she said, "My boyfriend is really violent, and he beats me regularly, and I know he loves me, but this is I can't take it anymore." And I said, "Well, what's happened?" And she said, "I had this baby 2 days ago, difficult birth, in hospital for sort of 24 hours, came back, and he insisted on having sex with me." And I said no, and he punched me in the stomach and basically raped me. And I've had enough. And I said, "Oh, that sounds awful. I'm really sorry. Right, have you got any family?" She said, "My dad's in Manchester and he's going to come and get me tomorrow." I said, "Okay. Where's this guy now?" She said, "I don't know. He goes off and he'll come back in the middle of the night probably and try and get me again." And I said, "What's he done in the past?" She said, "Well, the worst thing he did was, before I had the baby, he was sure I was having an affair with someone else. And he came back and he'd been high on crack. And he basically knocked me down and he had me lie they lived in a maisonette, lie with my legs on the bottom step, and he jumped on my legs till he broke the tibia in both legs. And I said, "How long ago is that?" She said, 2 years. And I said, "What do you do then?" She said, "Well, next day I'd go in hospital," and he was so apologetic, and he was, and it's that kind of thing. Part of you thinks, "You're mad," but then you kind of understand, you're kind of caught in this relationship. So I said, "Okay, we got to look after you now between now and when your dad comes down from tomorrow. Have you got any friends you can go to?" She said, "No, he hasn't let me have any friends." So I sort of speak to my boss, and he says, "Well, she's not staying here, mate. You've got to get her out of here." So I said, "Okay, I'll go with you back to your flat, your maisonette, and I'll wait with you till your dad comes, and then so you'll be all right." And I went down to the collators of the intelligence. I quickly looked up the boyfriend.
Yeah.
Jesus, it's kind of frightening kind of creature. Oh, God. So I went back to the DI and I said, "This is this bloke, and, can I have some help?" He said, "No." He says, "You'll shout." He says, "Either let her go or go with her." So, okay. Having said to her, "I'll look after you." So I went back with her. Had my wooden truncheon. I've got my radio that's got about 150 metre range. and we sit in this maisonette. And I remember it wasn't a nice place. It's kind of cold, but it was one of those, it was in these long communal corridors with doors either end. So whenever the doors opened, the door would rattle. And I sat in one chair and she sat in the other. And I was frightened, thinking that this guy comes back, it's going to be I'm unlikely to win this battle. But it just gave me an insight into living with that kind of fear from someone who you love or you think loves you.
Yeah.
And it kind of just, I always remember that. I've used that in lots of different sort of scenarios about understanding what you've got to understand what it's like to be in that position. I think as men, we need to understand what it's like for a lot of women, not necessarily in violent relationships, but just their fear of what might be out there for them. Their fear of walking along the dark path or getting into a taxi. We've got to understand that a bit better. Anyway, my dad came down and she went off safely. I didn't have to try and fight this monster, so it was all right.
So he didn't come back then?
Not that night. No, we got him the next day, but not in. I had a friend with me, and we got him properly the next day. So,
when you say you got him properly, you mean you got him lawfully?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
We had an arrest that was righteous, I suppose is a word to say.
You're a knight in shining armour, Nick.
No, not really. It's not. I've done things I'm not proud of, but it was one of those moments when you just, you kind of rejoin, having been in this kind of band of brothers. Everyone would go out and get back together to actually sit with a victim and wait for something to happen. Potentially, it was quite. It made a big impact on me.
And so, was that a fairly common sort of thing? I know, obviously, you don't go home with every victim. This was a special case, I guess you'd say. But how common is this?
Well, it's changed a lot because, probably 10 years later, the Met finally woke up to the amount of domestic violence that's going on. More murders happen in a domestic situation than any other situation. So more women are killed through domestic violence than are murdered through, violent criminals attacking each other or street crime and so on. So we started to think, how do we deal with this? And we set up specialist units to deal with it, called community safety units. People specially trained to sort of deal with it. We sent up refuges. We worked with charities that would provide shelters, those kind of ththings. So it's a much better situation. So it wasn't your choice is hang around the police station and hope you're not in trouble or go home and wait for something to happen. So it's a lot better now, and that certainly has changed, and for the good. But it's a really tricky area to work with because, quite often, you have victims who, they've been in long-term relationships, they've had children with these men, they're not optimists, but they hope that it may not happen again, or they trust, and, it is difficult, in prosecution terms, investigation terms, if you don't have a cooperating victim, it's quite hard to get someone to court and get them convicted.
So I guess it's this kind of thing of like being hot and cold, isn't it? So one day, you love them to bits and they're the greatest thing on the planet. And the next day, he's breaking her legs. And then he loves her again.
Yeah.
And then he hates her again. And then he loves her again. And then she's got no friends. And he's isolated her from her family, presumably.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't know whether they're coming or going. And I guess after a period of time, they think that is love and that is normal. Or that they're not worthy of anything else, because a lot of this will come with comments as well, won't it? Of you're not good enough, or you're this, or you're that, or who'd want you? You're just this and that.
Yeah, wear them down, dominate, control. Yeah, no, it's horrible. Yeah.
So after this, where do you go?
Okay, I got promoted to detective sergeant, and I went off to Hounslow, which is West London, which was a great, very different area, very big Asian population, poor white working class. All the airport and all the stuff going on around the airport. And I was there on promotion, youngest DS in the office, usual thing. So I enjoyed it a lot. It was, I had a new young team with me. We were given stuff to do by the DCI because he saw the energy and enthusiasm we were doing. So a successful time. Again, found some really good people to work with. And from there, I was selected to go up to the Central London Drug Squad, which was, again, another interesting time. Crack had just arrived in London. Lots of stuff happening in the city, lots of... I got involved through an informant with a kind of... I can't remember all their various names, but they were all kind of slightly entitled, sort of well-to-do people. I remember doing a drugs raid on premises in South Kensington where we bashed the door in and there was a lady so-and-so on the loo with a needle in her arm out of it, 2 or 3 other sort of trust fund types, people who had, every start in life but had just got into drugs and just... ended up ruining their lives, really.
So tell me about the arrival of crack. So I know in America the sort of the prevailing
Wind
theory with with crack was that it was sort of allowed by the government to ruin the project and the black population. I know it sounds a bit conspiracy theory. I think there is some truth in it. I'm not saying that happened here in the UK, but
I think it just came over with that kind of West Indian diaspora in the kind of 80s and I think in 90s. And it just, I mean, I think its impact was, what we thought would happen was kind of exaggerated. It didn't get quite as bad, but it was just a different kind of way of drug taking. You'd have this whole thing where it was such an immediate high and then an immediate low, and people just, the kind of craving for it straight away seemed to be more aggressive. So they would basically take over people's flats and set up what they call crack dens. It brought in a lot of concentrated crime into an area because people go there desperate. They go and do robberies and stabbings to get money anywhere locally. So it just became a bit of an issue. And, you know, we spent quite a lot of time trying to tackle it, whereas it's probably the least sexy part of drug enforcement. You know, most of my guys wanted to go off to, you know, I don't know, Malaga and do a buy-bust operation over there for a couple of kilos of coke. And I say, no, we got to spend 3 weeks on some scummy estate in West London doing observations, picking off junkies, proving they bought drugs from there, and then we, you know, kick the door in, arrest people, and then close off those premises. And that's not quite as much fun.
No, I imagine it isn't. Tell me about a drugs bust. Tell me about the training for a drugs bust. Tell me about the feeling of... you know, but I guess most of these are sort of 4 a.m. So you rock up, you know it's happening like a day ahead of schedule, or what's the... It's
generally informant-led, so an informant who you've arrested a month ago for something, he says, right, I'll give you some info. He comes back and says, right, Fred Bloggs is in this address, he's got, I don't know, a few ounces of this, he's got that. Best time to go in is early hours of the morning because they'll be sleeping it off. You ask who else is there? Have they got any weapons? Where's the drugs kept? Those kind of questions.
Yeah.
If you've been in, what's the door like? Is there a back door? So on and so on. So you get as much information as you can from people who are usually not really good at remembering those kind of details. You, in theory, do a risk assessment to say, you know, what should happen. You do checks on the occupants if they're known. Quite often you get stuff like, say, he's a yardie and he's violent and he's either got a gun or a machete. And he usually keeps his gear under his mattress, and he's fierce.
Tell the listener what a yardie is.
Well, a yardie is a Jamaican criminal who comes from the yards in Jamaica, and basically are supposedly a feared, generally black criminal with involvement in serious crime like drugs and violence related to drug dealing.
Right.
So I would gather my team and say, right, this is where we're going tomorrow. We'd have people called door openers who were a little team of civilians who had equipment that would prise open a door quietly. And then you say, right, you're number one, you're number two, you're number three, through the door.
Yeah.
We weren't armed. We would, if we were lucky, we'd take some pickaxe handles as sort of weapons just to try and protect ourselves. And the idea would just generally go in as early morning, the door would be popped open, and then we just run in shouting, police, don't move.
Right, shock and awe.
Yeah. And usually it was fine because, you know, people were dazed and stuff like that. But it was, the adrenaline certainly ran. And, of course, I was the DS running it. So you'd have a degree of responsibility. So I would usually feel I had to go in first and hope that I ran into an empty room and somebody else got the foot, you know, that kind of stuff. But,
yeah. But that's leadership, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And it was when you think about, if you roll it on to how it's done now and how it would have been done in the last sort of 10 years of my service, very, very different. You know, you never would have gone in. If you had information from a reliable informant that there were weapons in the premises, you'd always have a firearms team going there. But we just wanted to be the ones who arrested them. There's something about you've got to lay hands on them if you're a proper detective. And
how many of these raids did you do?
Oh, God, I was on the drug squad for 3 years, so probably 2 a week. 2 a week.
They all go smoothly, or have you got any war stories? I feel like you're holding back on some of these stories.
I mean, some were catastrophically kind of wrong. You know, we'd run in, there'd be an entirely innocent family in there, absolutely horrified to meet me and my friends at that time of the morning.
with pickaxe handles.
Yeah, there were times. There was one time in some flats in Victoria where we decided to use subterfuge. So we got our female officer to go there with a bunch of flowers, to bang on the door and say, "Got some flowers to deliver." And when the guy opened the door, I was forced the door through, went after him, and he had a machete behind the door, which he tried to attack me with it. So we had this kind of, and he had a very unpleasant dog. So I'm trying to hold his arm with a machete. I've got Jane, her name was, with the flowers, who's trying to be helpful but not really be helpful. And the dog is trying to bite the sort of backside out of my jeans. And the state of the flat was such that no one else could get in. So this kind of really silly kind of backwards and forwards. And you imagine the noise, the shouting by me, because I was frightened and I was trying to persuade this man he shouldn't bring the machete down and trying to force it back. So that was kind of messy, but it actually became a stated case in law because it was the first time he appealed it, and the decision was made in law that police could use subterfuge to gain entry into premises. It was a lawful method of doing it.
Right. Now, what is subterfuge? It's
trickery. It's trickery.
Right.
So basically, you pretend. To gain access to the flat, we pretended we were from the florist. So rather than saying police open up, in which course everything would go down the loo and be flushed, you obviously used ways. So that was in the kind of whatever it was, the mid-90s, and that became a stated case, which was unusual. It's just one of those things.
So is that now looked down upon as is that still lawful to use those?
It's completely accepted. My case made it acceptable, if you know what I mean. They on the basis of that said, this is a reasonable way for police to act.
Okay. And what do you say to someone after they've tried to kill you with a machete?
You're nicked. You're nicked.
Quite literally nicked.
Yeah, you're. I mean, there's a lot of shove them to the ground, get their hands behind their back, cuff them.
Yeah.
Probably punch them a couple of times.
Well, I was going to say, how do you? Because the adrenaline must be absolutely. It must just be running the show at that point, mustn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is quite hard to actually back down from that, and I've fortunately not too often found myself going overboard, but I have pulled back colleagues and said, enough, come back, enough, pull them off, And I remember being on a big housing estate in North London. I was looking for somebody who was doing daytime burglaries, and I saw this guy come out of a block of flats and he had a bag with him, and I just knew. He looked at me and I just knew he'd just committed a burglary. So he takes off and I started running, and my partner put a call out on the radio. So I'm running across this long sort of concrete sort of set of buildings, housing estate with grass in between, chasing him. And I can hear in the distance a police car coming, sirens, and they're sort of screeching at the brakes. And the car overtakes me and they pull to stop, and as my guy runs alongside, and they jump out just as I arrive. So I grab him, throw him to the ground. These two uniformed cops get out and run over, and they start punching and kicking this guy. So I end up punching and kicking back at them and saying, he's arrested, he's mine, he's fine. But they say, we've driven all the way. And you can see the kind of, again, it's that adrenaline rush. They wanted to go and vent. And I say, no, stop. He's not your prisoner, he's mine.
Interesting. Yeah, it must be difficult. And that's the conversation with some of the stuff in the States, isn't it? Last year is that their training is just not it's not good enough, and they're put in situations with fire. When you add firearms to the mix as a normality. There are going to be times where, and I'm not saying that I'm defending anyone who's committed acts of brutality, but I don't know, I guess when the adrenaline's taken over, mistakes get made, don't they? Especially if you feel like it is life or death.
Yeah, I mean, I find the American approach to policing kind of difficult. I've worked with Americans, I've run American cops when I worked in the Balkans, and this ridiculous approach to firearms. I mean, we worked in a post-conflict environment. We all had guns, but the only people who wore them all the time were the Americans. We would just put them on when we went to work, put them on when we were going to do an operation. They wore them all the time. Go for a McDonald's and they wear their guns. I said, what's the matter with you? What do you think is going to happen? It's just too many guns. There are more cops in America killed by people taking their guns off and shooting them than that. It's a kind of weird, just too many guns, madness.
Yeah, it's almost got to the point of no return now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know how you. It's a whole different podcast. How you fix that. But okay, so you've done your drug squad for 3 years. You had your fun kicking indoors and waking up innocent families at 4 a.m.
Yeah, that's it.
What's next? Do you go? I've got to get out of here.
I get the call. I get the call I've been waiting for the last 13 years, which is go and take the DCI at Barnes flying squad out for lunch.
Oh,
so my mate had already got to the flying squad. My really fantastic friend. He's already a detective sergeant on there, and the DCI, the Detective Chief Inspector, who runs the flying squad office for that quarter of London, and who decides who comes to work there, wanted me to buy him lunch in Barnes. And he turned out, he was the same DCI who I knew from when I went to Harrow Road, who would come out at 11:30 in the morning and say, right, we're going on the manor, we're going drinking. So I knew what he was like, so I got one of my guys to drop me off there, and we had a long lunch. He drank an awful lot, ran up a big bar bill, and said, right, you're coming over next Monday, whatever it was.
And how does this stuff work? You just go, he rings your boss and he goes, cool. Or what's the paper? Not that I want to talk about paperwork, but what's the process like?
Generally, there's usually a selection process that, there was. And
right.
I've been in countless interviews for different jobs, or sat on interview boards, kind of a whole funny set of stories in themselves. But with that, it was kind of a question of, if the DCI from the flying squad phoned up and said to your boss on the drug squad, I want him, then they say, okay, fine, you go. It's just accepted in that world at that time that no one was going to say no. So I went. So I joined them. So
there's no amount of your boss, I guess, at this case now your former boss, saying, hey, this is one of our best guys. I don't want you to take him.
In this case, no. Partly because he and I never got on. My boss on the drug squad and I never. We just. It was one of those. It's when it first came home to me how important. The most important thing about work is who you work with.
Yeah.
And he's dead now, poor chap. He died quite a long time ago. But he was a murder squad investigator. So he was a cop used to investigating crimes that had already happened. Whereas my whole career had been around trying to find crime being or about to be committing and dealing with it. So proactive policing. Uh-huh. And he and I just didn't get on. There's a kind of. He lacked any credibility. He was only put on the drug squad because the guy before him stole a kilo of cocaine from the Old Bailey and got suspended. So they thought we want somebody who's never done a bad thing in their lives and also never investigated a bloody crime to come and run it. So we didn't get on.
It's that thing, isn't it? It's what's that expression? Be the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah, maybe. But anyway, so that was my start, 1997, flying squad at Barnes. And I thought this was it. I'd arrived. I was, part of that select group. And in many ways it was good, but in some ways it was disappointing. It was so competitive. I thought I'd got there and that was it. You made it. But, you were in... the thing about the flying squad, its remit is to investigate all armed robberies on banks, building societies, betting shops, jewellers, and cash in transit. So quite a special. And the thing was, you'd investigate those that had happened, but the big thing was to find a group of blaggers and robbers, target them, follow them, watch them commit an armed robbery, and then arrest them. And that was
all the glory.
And that was the absolute buzz. That was, and because it was a self-contained, we had our own surveillance teams, we had our own firearms capacity, our own intelligence unit, and our own specialist drivers. So I had my driver, my forensic scene examiner for when I was on the bank car, as it's called, and then my surveillance team. So if I had a good informant, you say, right, these people are going to rob that bank or that cash in transit vehicle, and we get on them. It wouldn't happen now because, of course, the primary function of an efficient police, as I learned all those years ago, is to prevent crime. But we knew, because we were the squad, but we also knew that it's much stronger evidence at court if you've actually seen them do it rather than say that we've done it.
Right.
So unfortunately, we had a lot of robberies that we watched being committed, a lot of traumatised bank tellers and security guards who afterwards looked a bit bewildered when suddenly out of cars and vans, all these burly guys with pickaxe handles and firearms jumped on, and Rob said, "Well, we didn't know this was happening." "Oh, sorry, mate," but it did. So that was, and it was. My wife would describe it as, your time with boys with toys, because we were, amazingly well resourced and kind of in many ways accountable to no one but ourselves.
Wow. Were you guys like the SAS of the Met?
Well, the Met did have a firearms team, but as I said before, we were proud we never used them. It would be a sign. It'd be a sign of how feeble we were if we had to call on the wooden tops.
See, right. I thought that the firearms guys were part of your unit, like they were just like one of your many.
They were wooden tops, Andy. We wouldn't touch them. They were just uniform officers. They weren't detectives,
Explain. There's a look of sheer joy on your face. Explain the wooden top thing.
It's a really, sort of anachronistic and old-fashioned thing, but there was a real thing. If you were a detective, you had worked 3 or 4 times as hard as a uniform equivalence. You would sacrifice promotion to become a detective. So when you got there, and of course, you consider yourselves, especially when you got onto a squad, you were the elite of the detectives. So the uniform officers who just basically carried a uniform all their lives, occasionally gone on a course to learn how to operate a CS gas canister, or I don't know, drive a car faster, or fire paintball or something like that. They were nothing. So it was this kind of. I know there were funny times when we were going into West End Central Police Station with a prisoner with the flying squad, and we go in, and my number 2, so my DC, and he just kind of barged in. There's all these uniforms, and we come in, and we're obviously the squad with our ties and our sort of stuff, and he just says, "All right, lads," he says, "squad's here, get the kettle on." It's kind of horrible elitist kind of behaviour that you think, oh God, how did people behave like that? But it was that thing. So, when I was like on the flying squad, I remember, we had jobs where really, if you looked at it coldly and analytically, you said, right, this is much better. We get the firearms specialists out. They'll deploy with their, machine guns, their greater sort of firepower, and they will deal with this, in a way that they'll stop it happening. So no. We'll hang around with our Model 10 Smith & Wesson 6-shot revolvers that, frankly, would probably not work very effectively on anyone further than 10 feet away from you. And we'll hide in cars and vans and houses, and we'll let it happen. Then we'll jump out on these people with sawn-offs and stuff like that, because we wanted the glory. We wanted the kind of status of having taken them down. So kind of entertaining and funny and daft and huge adrenaline highs and stuff like that.
And dangerous.
But that was part of the fun. We kind of had I had a case where there were 4 flying squad officers, so London is split into 4, and we were massively kind of in competition with the others, And so if I had a team of armed robbers who operated in North East London, I would never ever tell the North East London flying squad officer. I would deal with them from South West London. We'd go over there, even if it added 2, and we would deal with them over there. And so and we had a team that were operating in North West London, which was the Finchley area, and Finchley officer tried to arrest this team 3 times and failed. So I got information from an informant who said, this group are going to go to work. They're going to steal a Range Rover from Shepherd's Bush tomorrow night, and they're going to go and rob a cash and transit van. So it's okay. Do you know where the Range Rover is? And they said, yeah. So we got out there the night before and lumped up. So we put a tracking device underneath the Range Rover.
Now, what does that look like what year is this?
1997, 98.
So what's the tracking device look like in 97, 98?
About the size of a packet of fags.
Right. So that's quite big, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
By today's standards.
Yeah. So we got.
And is it magnetic?
Yeah, it's magnetic. Range isn't brilliant, and so on. So we do that, and fantastically, this team come in and they steal it. So we're on them. So 4 guys, and one of them is the main guy we know. We call him Jeffrey, who has been the target of Finchley Flying Squad, 3 previous operations and failed again. And he's there, and they go all around London for 3 days. Yeah. And they will go. I mean, they went into Epsom, and there was a cash in transit. Like the big sort of armoured vehicles come in, and they get out, and they're balaclavas, and you see they've got hats on, and they roll them down. And when I'm saying right, stand by, and then they decide not to. They get back in the Range Rover. And on the 4th day, they went up to Kingsbury in North West London, and and I've got the gunships, as we call it. So myself controlling it with a firearms officer, my driver, and another firearms officer in the front, and two others, and the surveillance team were all armed, and we're kind of listening for sort of, you get the sort of feedback, he's out of the vehicle, the guard's out, and then suddenly he said, right, they're on him, the robbery's happened. So we jump out. I jumped out of the back of my vehicle, and the driver starts driving as I'm getting out and runs over my left foot as I'm getting out with his big, heavy Ford Granada. So I stopped myself from shooting him out of spite and anger and run off through the sort of crowded Kingsbury road where, imagine, it's a sort of busy sort of weekday, lots of people shouting and yelling, and they'd fired shots, and the cash in transit box with the money in it had a dye pack in it. Right. So when they took it, that explodes. There's all sorts of chaos. And I, to my shame, persuaded the surveillance team to bring a video guy out with us to film it for good evidence. I should have known better, because this idiot came along to film it. And so I'd kind of run up to check how we're doing. And we got 4 prisoners, and 3 of them are sort of trussed up. Where guys have got them, they've disarmed them, and they've touched. And the main guy, Jeffrey, is lying on his side, and only one arm is secured, and he's blown about a bit. So I rush over, got my gun out, and I say, "Is he controlled?" He goes, "No, we're not sure. We haven't found a gun yet." So I just reach over and basically stamp on his hip to sort of flatten him, so he's lying on his front, and he doesn't quite move over. So I stamp again. At the same time, the video guy is filming this, and he starts shouting, "Stop stamping on the prisoner," which I didn't really pay attention to until 12 months later at the Old Bailey. This is played as part of the evidence. And I'm suddenly held up to be the demon who's tracked this innocent group of men around London and then jumped on them and beat them up in the street. And they actually got off. They actually got found not guilty.
Right. On the technicality of you.
No, I mean, it was that kind of clever sort of defence. They basically said they were under duress. They committed the robbery because they owed a huge drug debt to Mr. Big. And if you don't commit this armed robbery and get the money, I'm going to kill you and your children. So the jury believed it. It's just shocking. They also believed that, it had been a fit up by the flying squad. We were all corrupt. Kind of quite distressingly kind of, a huge high. And I remember getting phone calls after we'd arrested him saying, "Oh, you've got him banged to rights. You've got him on the pavement." Oh, yeah, great. And then a year later, they'll walk out the Old Bailey and do an interview outside saying that the flying squad fitted them up and they never did a thing wrong. It's shocking.
Interesting. So I guess in that squad you're dealing with organised crime, of a much higher level. So it's not your addicts on the street who are doing petty crime to get by. It's not. Well, you have mentioned that you've got your sort of more entitled upper class rich kids kind of stuff that they're making mistakes and getting busted as well. But I guess that the flying squad goes above them even, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean the rich kids was a kind of the sort of trust. Just in terms of investigation or policing, you arrest an informant, you arrest somebody for drugs, and he or she will give you his group. The guy we caught with some coke happened to have been at. He went to school with Prince Charles, actually, this guy. So his group of friends, the people he was dealing drugs with, were all from that sort of background. The people we dealt with on the flying squad were generally armed robbers, and sometimes they were almost a generational thing. And in the kind of criminal world, a blagger, an armed robber, had a certain status. So they were the proper criminals. So when they get to prison, they get a bit of respect and stuff like that. So different. Yeah. So they were good people to go after. There was a kind of no nonsense, almost, when you arrested them on the pavement, bang to rights, there was almost a recognition, right, okay, you got me type of thing. It was, part of the deal,
Yeah. I'm quite a big fan of Dave Courtney. It's a strange sentence to say. I mean, I spoke to him not that long ago on the phone. Actually, I want to get him on. I want to get him on the podcast, but of course he wants paying, doesn't he? And he says, doing the bird. Do you know what I mean? Only carry the weapon that you're willing to do the bird for. Blah blah blah. But he had an interesting thing. He said, I don't know why going to prison is such a respected thing in these worlds, because he says it means you got caught. And you weren't very good at what you do. He said you weren't a very good naughty boy if you ended up in prison. And he said when he went to prison, it's where he learnt how not to get caught. He just asked everyone how they got caught. And they told him.
Yeah, he was part of that point in time. There was this kind of era when people like him and others, there was a sort of glamour around that kind of crime.
Yeah.
For another time, I could talk to you about him.
Oh, okay. Off the record.
Yeah. All is not as you think.
I've been told by some people who claim to be credible some things, but I don't know. But yeah, an off the record Dave Courtney chat would be great, because I'm going to speak to him at some point in the future. We're going to do one of these.
Yeah.
So we'll move away from the archetypal London gangsters that are probably better in books than they are in
fictional stuff.
In real life. So what else did you learn with the flying squad, and what was next? Because I know that you've gone overseas and stuff, but is the flying squad the best part of your career? Is that
not really. No, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I've been really lucky, really varied, but it was an odd thing. My time on the flying squad, it was a 3 to 5 year posting. My DCI on the flying squad had been replaced. The one who recruited me retired before he got nicked, and he was replaced by someone who we didn't see eye to eye at all. And so I knew my 3 years wasn't going to become a 5 year posting. And the Friday before I was due to be told that, I got a phone call from somebody I'd worked with before who said, do you want to come for a beer? And I said, yeah, he's a lovely guy, so I went for a beer. And he said, we've just set up a covert anti-corruption team. The commissioner had bitted in the House of Parliament that he believed that there was a significant number of Met Police detectives who were really seriously corrupt, and he was going to set up and had formed this specialist covert team to take them on. This guy who I worked with before said, will you come and work with them? Because there's a thing about cops, you don't really want to be investigating your own. Yeah. But equally I thought, well, what else am I going to do? And I really liked him, this guy, Tim, a really, really lovely guy. And I said, well, okay. He said, okay, 8 o'clock, Monday morning, Tintagel House, the police building next to the MI6 building. I said, okay. So I turned up there and had a kind of then a confidential briefing with the head of the unit. And he said, right, tomorrow morning, 5 a.m, I want you to be taking a team over to Rig Approach flying squad offices, where we're going to be arresting 5 of the detectives on the flying squad.
Uh-oh.
So I said, Jesus. He said, I know you just come from the squad. He says, but that's the game.
Right.
I said, right, well, give us a briefing, let's find out. And so we ended up going. So my second day on the anti-corruption squad, I had to go and arrest people who I'd been on operations with, I'd been working with. Frankly, some quite sad individuals. What they've been doing is they've been going to a cash in transit robbery. So some robbers come and rob a vehicle that's got money on it. The robbers take all the notes. With the guards, if they're not been shot, call 999. Uniform turn up. It's a flying squad operation. They call the flying squad. The flying squad turn up and say, right, Woodies, clear off. We got the scene. So they deal with it. This lot were then bringing up their private cars and loading what was left into their private cars. And stealing it. The point was, it was just the coin that was left. And on one occasion, the car broke down because it had too much weight in the boot. So they had to get it towed. They had to get it towed into the flying squad offices. I mean, this only came out when we were doing the investigation. I went and arrested this guy who'd been part of that team, and he was sad. I mean, his wife had kicked him out because he was a drunk, and et cetera, et cetera. And he was living in this really shabby flat, and bit of respect for your sort of colleagues. You don't kick the door. He knocked on the door and go in. And he said, oh, I know who you are. And I said, yeah. He said, I thought you were one of us. I said, well, I am one of us, mate, but, you've been nicked for robberies, or certainly thefts. And I said, have you got anything here you shouldn't have? And he said, well, you're going to find it anyway. So he had a little bedside cabinet, like a little drawer, 3-drawer thing, and I opened the top drawer, and the bottom fell out. It was just full of 10p pieces. I mean, talk about pathetic kind of, just. So that was a kind of introduction to sort of doing that. So, and I think in a way it was almost a bit of a test for me on there. They were saying, well, you're coming on, we're going to send you out to arrest some of the people you've been working with. So, I mean, they were kind of quite sad. And then we got into a kind of interesting, because it was one of those things that, policing where you had, because it was such a priority to get rid of bad cops, that you were given all the resources you need, so all the kind of additional stuff you normally struggle to get, like, sort of the covert surveillance equipment you'd struggle to get, and all that stuff we're given. So it's kind of interesting, but sad time. Sad to sit listening to intercepted telephone calls of detectives who you've known and worked and respect with, organising, a GBH, or organising to bring in tons of marijuana from North Africa, stuff like that. I think, what happened? What happened to you? Somebody who I'd met first at detective training school in 1987, became a good friend of mine. He went to one of the other 4 flying squad officers the same time as I went to Barnes. And I had to go and arrest him 10 years later from when I first met him, but 5 years later from when we both joined flying squads. And I had to arrest him because he'd been part of a team that basically stealing money from robbery, crime scenes. And I said, Paul, what happened? How did we get here? And he said, that first week when you join the squad and you're in there and you're looking around at all these people you've been selected to work with, and it's your proudest moment. He said, I said, of course I know that. He said, at the end of that first week, on the Friday, the governor came round the office. We were all there, done a good week, and he came and gave everyone an envelope. I got my envelope, 100 quid in it. Everyone else has an envelope, and they all put it in their pockets, so I put it in my pocket. What was happening was they were skimming money out of robberies and sharing it out. And I have to say, had I been in this situation, would I have been brave enough to say, excuse me, where's this come from? Or would I just have accepted it like he did? And of course, once you're corrupted, once you're in, then you're stuck. There's no turning back.
Dirty then, aren't you?
Yeah.
Forever, really, if they can prove it.
Oh, you went to prison. That's awful, really. Yeah.
And is it because the flying squad is, it's prestige and legend and almost, riding on the highs and successes of the guys before you, but not enough pay? Or is it just power? Power corrupts.
It just takes. It's not the pay. You could earn you could work 14 hours a day if you wanted. You had a comfortable existence, and I know. Right. Nobody joins the police to become rich. You can earn a, but it's not. But it was just that sudden flip, and with Paul, it was that started. He got that money, and then turned out that one of the detectives on there had an informant who was a woman who was in her own right, a really successful drug dealer.
Right.
And she and this other detective became an item, and she started to supply really high quality information on drugs and robberies. And it started to be, that whole squad just worked off her information.
Right.
And of course she started to manipulate it all. And they would say, right, this guy's got this amount of drugs, these firearms, committed these robberies. They'd go there and they'd find all this money, all these drugs, all that stuff there. And no one was going to say, oh, the police took that, because as a criminal, if you get arrested with 50,000 or 100,000, that gets added to your sentence in terms of criminality. So they don't want you to find it. So they're not going to complain there was money there. So it was right. They're caught up in it. So it's a kind of murky world. And he was a lovely guy, he just got caught up in it and, ends up 3 years in prison.
I guess if every Friday someone's handing you an envelope and all of your colleagues an envelope, that's office culture at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And it's a brave person who say, no, I was just lucky my office didn't do that. Not in front of me, they didn't.
Right. That's interesting. So you're on the corruption squad now. You think they've sent you out to arrest your own, to see how committed to this you are. And maybe to see if you corrupted yourself.
A bit of a test. It's not the corruption squad, it's the anti-corruption squad. Okay?
Oh, the anti-corruption squad. You go after the corruption squad.
Yeah. We're going to go and be corrupt together, guys. Yeah, that'd be a good squad. Yeah. So it was an interesting time, and it kind of tough. And also it made you realise quite quickly how it's really hard to convict cops, because they can always, particularly in that area of sort of specialist crime and covert policing, where a lot of the information we had against them was stuff that you couldn't use evidentially.
Right.
So they would say, right, if you pursue me and go to prosecute me, I will tell the court and I will explain publicly all the things I've been involved in. I'll give the details of all my informants. So you then have to work out, okay, if they do that, we've then got to rehouse, protect people who would be under threat of death, and kind of so quite often we ended up having really strong cases we thought against people who seriously got, but doing them for things like driving their police car when they were off duty or claiming expenses they weren't entitled to. But we sacked them, we got them out, type of thing.
Right. That is interesting. And do you think a lot of these cops that have gone a bit sour, or I use the word cops? Is that too American?
No. Cops is fine. No. Cops is fine. Yeah.
So, like you said, that one of your former bosses was a murder investigator on the murder investigation. That's a grim job, isn't it?
It's a dull job, Andy. It's a dull job. It's a dull part of policing.
Do you think that will change people? Do you think a lot of these people that have been corrupt and have been you were going after, they've seen things, had to witness things, they've seen the darkness out there, and do you think they've just sort of got lost in that and lost their way, or is it purely opportunist?
I think the sort of the murder. I've been involved in murder investigations, stuff like that. It's tragic, it's sad. But it's not something that should change your behaviour or how you are. Exposure to manipulative, serious, organised criminals on a regular basis who are cunning, who are smart, street smart, who've got a completely different agenda to you and will see their opportunity to seize it. There's a bigger sort of challenge in that sense.
Right.
And that's where the kind of corruption issues come from. I mean, there's a sort of petty cop who goes to a crime scene and, there's been a burglary, and they go into the burglary and there's a couple of, there's something lying around, they pick it up and pocket it. But these are people who are, actively involved in stealing, large amounts of money, or working in collaboration with criminals to steal from other criminals. And, just completely against, what you should do as a upholder of the law.
And so where'd you go after that?
I went after that. I was, I don't know if you've heard of a murder of a young black guy called Stephen Lawrence in London, in Eltham, which became notorious, became the subject of a judicial review, the Macpherson report, hugely transformative thing. But basically, young black guy with his friend in Eltham in southeast London in 1997, when 5 white men chased and stabbed him to death. And the police investigation is bungled.
Right.
None of the suspects who were named quite soon are arrested straight away, and so on. And it becomes a sort of cause célèbre. As a result, the Met get into a kind of real mess and realise they've got to do something. And they formed a special team to go after the 5 suspects. And I was brought in by the head of that unit to run the covert policing teams to try and get evidence of their involvement in the murder. So again, one of those kind of quite nice in terms of I get taken out of one office where I've got all the tools to do a job that I want to another one where basically the commissioner said to the Met, right, Nick and his team, they will get whatever they need to do this job. So I could go into our technical support unit who would normally say, ooh, that special bit of kit on the top shelf, you can only have that for a special job and yours isn't special enough. I'd just go in and say, I want the whole of your top shelf and I want it now in the back of my car, please, because the commissioner said so. So we went after these 5 guys and spent 2 years doing all sorts of things, bugging cars, bedrooms, rocks, hotel rooms. It's kind of funny in a way, but to try and get evidence, the kind of practice was you had your suspect who you wanted to talk about what they'd done in the past. So what you wanted to try and do was to get them out of where they would live, get a listening device into the premises, let them back into the address, not knowing you'd been in there, and then trigger some kind of reaction that would cause them to talk about what they'd done.
Right.
So we had lots of sort of crazy things. I remember one in South London when this family who we had information had been the people who one of the murder suspects had come to after the murder and given them some clothing to get rid of. And they lived in this flat in Black Fen near Sidcup. And so you do some surveillance on them, and you realize they never leave this flat. They're this family who have the most unhealthy lifestyle. Everything is delivered to the house that they eat. This is like way beyond COVID. This is way before COVID. Right. They just don't do anything active. They don't work. The kids don't go to school. They don't do anything apart from sit and see to watch TV. So how are we going to get them out of the house? And we got the local steakhouse to send them, hey, you've won a free night for 5, full all expenses paid steak dinner. that we kind of paid him to do. This is dropped in, and they phone up the steak place and say, well, you send it round and we ain't bloody bothering, sort of thing. They wouldn't get out. We thought we'd get a TV into them that had a camera in it facing out and a recording device. Again, so, hey, you've won this new TV, do you want it? No, it's not the right TV for us. It's kind of endless, kind of comical things to try and get them to happen. So spent quite a bit of time working in that area. And eventually, sadly, after 2 years, we basically ran out of things we could do to get any evidence. Right. And so I basically decided, okay, we'll quietly shelve that, really. And so I had this team of personally selected, highly skilled, experienced detectives working to me, all this specialist equipment, and nothing to actually, no specific area to focus on.
Right.
So I remembered back to my days of my victim with her little baby and the broken legs, and I thought, okay, what's not happened in London is there's not been this kind of resource deployed against repeat domestic violence offenders. So we did some work and we identified, because quite often men generally, who are repeat domestic violence offenders are also involved in other crime. So I said to my analysts, okay, find me the top 3 baddest men in London who have beaten women and are involved in other crime, and we'll go after them. And they found me a guy, I don't remember his name now, but South London drug dealer who had put 2 women into hospital. One of them was in a mental institution, so traumatised by her experience. The other one he'd beaten so badly, and she'd gone back up to Manchester where she lived and was back with her family. These were educated women he'd gone after. And he's a really good-looking, handsome, kind of educated, smart dude, but he's a horrible, horrible bugger. And he had this third woman he was living with in Peckham. And I said, right, we'll go after him for everything he's got. We know he's into drugs and firearms. And we had his Porsche tracked and fitted with recording devices. We had his house fitted with recording devices. We had his phones intercepted. And we spent 3 months on him. We got him with a kilo of coke and a firearm. And he went to prison for 9 years. Didn't have to bother his current girlfriend who he's beating or anyone else. But one of the things really moving at that time, because we had his house fitted with microphones, was listening to him talking to her in the house. And it made your blood run cold listening to the way he spoke to the woman who he professed to love. I remember us sitting in there, we had a kind of listening booth in our offices where you sit and listen to stuff. And we kind of put headphones on, you listen, you kind of look at each other and you think, it was horrible to listen, horrible, the way that man spoke. And I used those recordings. I got involved in doing a couple of conferences speaking about domestic violence, and I played those to a couple of conferences and saying, I'm not going to tell you who this was and so on, but just listen to what people will be facing on a daily basis. This is someone who loves the man she lives with, and he supposedly loves her, and this is how he speaks to her at breakfast or at supper or whatever.
Yeah. And how do you sit there and listen to that with your colleagues? And that at that moment you can't just go and bust the door down with your pickaxe handle and make it right. You have to sit and bide your time and wait. And how do you not take that home with you?
I mean, sometimes you don't, and it kind of, at times it's reminding me a bit of the David Attenborough programs when you watch, like a little baby seal emerge and it's kind of waddling down to the ocean, and there's a killer shark waiting, and you think you want to jump in and pick it up, but you can't. And of course, there's nothing we could do because he hadn't done anything to it at that time. But when we got him. It's that kind of thing that it was a righteous arrest, as I said before. It wasn't just the firearm and the kilo of coke you're being arrested for. It was,
I spoke to a guy recently who's written books on the FBI and the CIA and things like that, and we talked a little bit about how they do their bugging operations in bits and pieces, and some of the more James Bond sort of, maybe not even James Bond, but the more glamorous sort of fun, things of sneaking in people's buildings and trying to find ways to catch them out. Tell me how you would do a general bugging of a building, and what sort of different sort of devices and things are available to you. And what year is this? What year are we in right now?
We're talking about the early 2000s.
So a little bit more sophistication on the whole.
Yeah, but not a lot. Not a lot. But yeah, I mean, basically, you have your target premises.
Yeah.
So say it's a semi-detached house on a South London housing estate with 3 or 4 occupants. So you start off by putting surveillance on the occupants. So you get an observation point. So you've got they've got the premises in sight. You identify their vehicles if they've got them, and you spend 2, 3, 4 weeks working out their movements and trying to identify when they're out. If you can, you'll get the helicopter up to do an overview so you can get a kind of vision of sort of 360. Again, this is before Google Earth was effective. You can do the same kind of looks. So you just get a really complete picture of how the occupants behave. You try and get a close-up when they leave the house. How do they lock it? How's it, do they double lock? Is it Chubb and so on? And then you pick your time when you know they're away. If you can, you control them when they're away. If there's 4 occupants, it's quite tricky because that's 4 surveillance teams to sort of go with them and just make sure you've got them controlled. And you certainly spend, before you go in, you'll have 48 hours non-stop surveillance, usually physical rather than camera, or physical and camera, to make sure they haven't invited somebody over you don't know is going to be staying over. And then when the house is clear, you'll send in your door openers and your technicians. They'll video it as they go in. So make sure that when they move stuff to put in devices, they're not going to be, leaving it disarranged. I mean, most of the time people don't know because they're not that meticulous. But if you're going after really good people, they will be thinking they may be susceptible, they may be targets, so they maybe lay traps for you. So you're looking for that. But it's an evolving thing. And of course now you've got all sorts of home devices that people will have where they'll set up their own home CCTV system, so it can be completely stuffed before you start off. In those days, those systems certainly weren't widely available. So it was better though. We had times when we've had our people in there and they've been in the sitting room putting in devices, and they'll hear the loo flushing upstairs, and this is kind of whispered on the radio across the premises. What do you want us to do? I think, oh Christ, what do you do? Get out is the answer. You can't stay in.
That's amazing. That is so amazing. And have you had times where you've been rumbled?
Yeah.
They've gone, they've got halfway down the street and they've gone, I haven't got my wallet.
Yeah.
And they come back in and they go, who the fuck are you?
Yeah. No, I've had people in there and they've had to pretend they were burglaring it.
Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, I didn't know. Oh, shit. Yeah. What do they? So these are like nasty criminals. And you have to then be the guy that's pretending to burgle him.
On this case, the person coming back was the wife of the nasty criminal.
Okay.
So she was supposed to be working all day, and she suddenly came back up, started coming back up. My guys are in there, and I said, right, grab a video, get the old video recorder, and come out of the house. Because there was no way they couldn't get out in time. So they came out, she shouted at them, they shouted, and they just ran off, and that was it. She didn't report the burglary to the police, interestingly.
Really? Well, the criminals don't tend to call the police, do they?
So we got away with that. We got away, and they had left. They got some stuff deployed, so we did hear her go inside and then phone up her boyfriend and say, fuck, blah, 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 but just didn't think it was the old Bill, which was good.
That's amazing. What do you do if you turn around and you realise that, your mate's trailed mud all through the house, or someone's knocked the vase over or something like that? You have any moments like that where you're like, oh my God?
I mean, if one of your team make that kind of basic cock-up, they buy breakfast for the team for the next week. It's a fine. It's a serious fine,
Like a swear jar. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so you've done, so where are we now?
Okay, so we're in 2003, 2004. 2004, I get a phone call from somebody I work with on the anti-corruption squad who said, I've just been promoted to Deputy Chief Constable of Surrey Police. Do you fancy coming down? Do you fancy a promotion and coming down here? And I said, well, interestingly, I've just moved my family to Surrey, and that promotion was promotion of superintendent, which is quite a significant jump up in rank.
Right. How many ranks is this?
Well, no, it's one rank, but it is the one where you
things change.
The money is significantly different. Okay. So I thought, well, okay, So I said, yeah, I'll sit the selection process. I'm sure it's going to be a competitive process, which it was actually. Anyway, got the job, and I turned up there on the Monday, and he said to me, right, I want you to run my specialist crime teams. And I said, rather petulantly, I really don't want to do that because I've been doing that for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, really? He says, I selected you because you've done all that, but you don't want to do it. And I said, well, yeah. And so he said, well, come see me tomorrow. And I went back the next day and he said, right, you know that job you turned down? I said, yeah. He said, right, you're now head of customer service for Surrey Police. And I said, oh, right, thank you. This feels like a punishment. He said, well, it might do. He says, but take it from me, it's not, because we've been set targets by the Home Office, the level of public satisfaction with the police force in their area. So I thought, oh, crikey, that's something for me to think about. So he said, go have a week off, go and think about it, come back with a plan. So I went back and did some reading, and basically, cut long short, if you think about policing, police have the monopoly on that service.
Yeah.
No one else, if you get house gets broken into, you can't phone anyone else apart from the police if you're going to phone anyone. And so I thought, okay, what are people's impression then of us as a service? So I did a bit of work and a bit of reading about it. And there's this expression in customer service called delighting the customer. You'll know this, Andy, from the co-op, right? Delighting the customer. So I got 120 response cops into a big hall in Dorking. They didn't know who I was because I'd been in the force for a week. And I said, I'm Nick Dove, I'm your new detective superintendent. I'm in charge of customer service. Can you tell me or think how, when you go out and work every day, how you delight the customer? And I could see the hand gestures from the back of the hall towards the idiot, not complimentary hand gestures. But when you got into it and you kind of worked out, the things that matter to people when they've been victims of crime are what actions have police taken? What did you do when my house was broken into? And will you keep me informed of what's happening? And when you looked at our systems and processes, they were so, cops would go so far out of their way not to tell someone, that's the end of it, we ain't going to solve it. They just forever just not respond. So I kind of spent quite an interesting time working in that area. I decided I was a bit bored with not being involved with people, like as a cop, because I was now quite senior. So I trained as a hostage negotiator at the same time, which gave me an insight. Yeah,
as you do.
Well, it was one of those things it's one of those things you do as a cop in your own time. Basically, it's an odd thing, but it's something you become on call, and it's just you're on. Your phone goes and there's something bad happening. Go deal with it. You drop everything you're doing.
Now, weird question: if you've got a hostage negotiation, some sort of qualification or whatever it is, and you're not you use it once in a blue moon, does your pay go up because you've got that? You only get paid when you do it.
Don't get paid at all for doing it.
Oh,
there's no financial advantage at all to being a hostage negotiator.
Well, aren't you a saint? Because if that goes wrong, if that goes wrong, I know whether you're getting paid or not, it's still horrible if it goes wrong. But to volunteer to do something that could stay with you forever, should it not go the right way, is quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, but think about. you don't go to think it's going to go wrong. You go think, I'm going to save someone, and get somebody back.
Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And it is fantastic. The adrenaline high and the rush and the kind of the focus, the zone you get into when you're negotiating with somebody, is so extreme, and it's hugely rewarding and interesting. And I loved it. I put myself on call way too often. Frankly, my wife got really fed up with me.
So tell me about the basics of hostage negotiation.
The basics is active listening.
Right.
The most important thing about a hostage negotiator is that your job is to gather intelligence to allow the operational cops to rescue someone. So really all you're doing is forming a bond with the hostage taker and developing a kind of relationship so they will tell you things that they might not want to tell you about. And they get to a point where you won't necessarily get their trust, but you'll get to a point where you will find out enough, you'll draw enough out of them to give your tactical team options into how they're going to deal with it. And sometimes you just talk them out, or sometimes you'll get them to the front of the building, we'll go in the back, or you'll get them to release somebody else, those kind of things. So the most important thing is, can you when you talk to them, are you listening? Are you getting stuff out? And the training, you start with, you sit back to back. I would sit with my back against yours, and you would talk about something, and I would just listen, and I would try and just find out. It sounds really basic, but it's fascinating. I mean, I love that world, and I really enjoyed it, and it was.
How much of that is psychology? And
a lot.
Yeah. And having an intuition with people as well, and being able to, like, having an emotional intelligence to understand, because they want you. I guess at the end of the day, if you're really effective, is they end up thinking that you actually, you're on their side a little bit, I guess, or that you're, hey man, this dude gets it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the circumstance. I mean, I guess about 80% of negotiation is actually with suicidal people. 20% is with hostage takers. So it's a kind of funny mix. I mean, the one that stands out in my mind as being different was somebody I know got kidnapped. Basically, we were living in Surrey, but I was working in London. And my wife got a phone call at sort of 7 a.m. from Ghana to say, hi, how are you? She said, I just in a bit of bother. Do you think you can send me some money? And she said, what? She said, well, yeah, a bit of bother, And she could hear some male voices in the background. And she said, what's going on? He said, and then the phone got taken off him, and this guy comes on and said, hey, hi, we need you to send us some money. Otherwise, bad things will happen. And then something bad happened because she could hear the noise of him being hurt. He said, basically, don't contact the police, and I'm going to phone you in an hour with whatever I want, or whatever it was. She phones me. I'm in my office in London. But I nipped downstairs where we had the hostage negotiation suite, which is basically a kind of big room with screens. Call in the kind of analysts and researchers you need, the sort of field officers. And it just so happened a really good friend of mine, a great friend of mine, was on call for that suite. And I said, John, this has happened. And he said, right, what we need to do is basically police forces have their kind of regions they're responsible for. At the moment, the crime has happened in Surrey because that's where the call was received. We'll send a car and a driver down and pick her up and bring her to London. So the crime scene is in London. We'll just move your phone so it rings in London. So I said, okay, fine. And he said, how do you feel about being the number one on the call? As a negotiation, you have number one, number two. You work together in pairs on negotiation. And I said, yeah, okay, fine, let's do it. And then we had a 48-hour period when I was fielding the calls and trying to negotiate for his release. And it was odd because you really get, if you imagine you're in a small room and you're face to face with your number two who's listening to what you're saying on headphones, and you've got these horrible people speaking into you, and you're trying to kind of get something and so I was immediately trying to portray myself, poor civil servant, didn't have much money, etc., etc. And a very angry, shouty man on the other end, men as it turned out. And at one point, it just felt right when he was getting really angry to hang up on him. Right. Just that shout, and I just unplugged the phone. And my number two just looked at me and he said, Jesus, what have you done? Because he was saying, I'm going to cut his throat, I'm going to cut his throat, I'm going to do this, and I just cut him off.
So when you did that, was there a moment of like, oh shit, I did that,
It to me, it felt right, but my number two said, don't worry if it goes wrong. He says, I'll burn the tapes. Nobody will. Anyway, they came back on, changed the SIM card, came back on, and we eventually, after some conversation, some of silliness, running around to Western Union on Paddington Station and sending money through that system, we got him back. But that was different because that had the kind of emotional tie.
So you paid them in the end, did you?
Yeah, we paid him, and he paid us back. One of the good things. One of the good things was that part of our intel cell was we got into all his bank accounts and checked he got the money before we paid the money.
Oh wow! How much did you pay?
I think it was 20,000. But it turned out that it was a low. It was Ghanaian police officers,
right,
who were doing this as a side thing. They'd pick off white sex tourists.
Oh.
Yeah. and yeah, so there you go. So yeah.
So Nick Dove does negotiate with terrorists. Big thank you to my guest this week, Nick Dove, for spending the time with us to tell us all those great stories. As Nick isn't plugging a book or selling an album or anything like that, we are going to leave some links to further reading and viewing material on the Metropolitan Police, the Flying Squad, and other things that Nick has mentioned. If we find anything that we think you guys would enjoy as a sort of follow-up research, then we will put those in the show notes descriptions for you. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That would be really great. If you've got one friend you think would really enjoy this, then please, by all means, send that to them. It's free of charge, and it helps us grow and it helps support this podcast, this show. If you want to check us out on social media, you can. The handle for Instagram and Twitter is @TheGiantPod. My Instagram is Andy_S1S. Come and say hello. This podcast was produced by Detective Inspector Harry Williams. And we will see you next week on The Giant Pod. Thanks very much.